all want to be happy, right? We get married because we're in love, and what do we want once we get married? Well, we want to be happy together. What do we want for our kids? We want them to be happy, right? This is one of the most neglected topics of all when it comes to marriage preparation, preparing for lifelong love. Yet it's so important. The research shows it's one of the most important things that you can cover as a newly married couple or an engaged couple. Let me tell you something. The habit of happiness stems out of an experience. In fact, we were speaking in the San Juan Islands for some friends at this little camp. Have you ever been to the San Juan? So gorgeous, you know. And anyway, we were done with our remarks, and we had another engagement we needed to get to. And so there was this little four-seater Cessna that
rickety
picked us up
little
on a grass, runway, and literally deer had to scamper out of the way when this plane came in to pick us up. It was just picturesque. But both of us looked at each other like, oh man, do we have to get on this plane? We've had too many horror stories and tragedies that have happened. Anybody been on a four-seater Cessna? You know, anybody done it more than once? You're brave. And so anyway, we didn't have an option. We climbed into this thing, and the plane took off, and it was just breathtaking. I mean, over one side of the plane, you could see the Cascade Mountains, and on the other side were the Olympic Mountains and the sun, coming through, and down below all these white boats and the blue and the green islands and all that kind of stuff. And all our fear just kind of dissipated. Yeah. And as we were flying in to land into Seattle, I turned to the pilot, and we have these headphones on. I said through the speaker, I said, hey, what's the secret of getting a good landing? And he said, the secret is to find the right attitude in spite of atmospheric conditions. And I turned around to Leslie, who was seated behind me. I said, he meant to say altitude. And he pulled on my shirt sleeve. It was noisy in there. He said, no, I meant to say attitude. And he explained that pilots talk about the attitude of a plane, the nose in relationship to the tail and the ground. I'd never heard that before. I got out of that airplane, and I turned to Leslie, and I said, find a pen. I got to write that down. Finding the right attitude in spite of atmospheric conditions. That's what the habit of happiness is all about.
When we sat down and looked at our finances and realized that our student loan debt together was pretty significant, that's an area that could lead to a lot of stress and really just kind of eat away at the marriage every single day. But we have made it a choice to be above that.
So I think we've realized that life, is always going to have hurdles and maybe difficult things you have to overcome. But we've realized that it's just a choice. You just have to be happy, and we've decided to do that.
I got to tell you, I wish that I could package it up and give it to you as a wedding gift. I wish I could give it to everybody that gets married. It would make such a difference. It's really about the capacity to adjust to things beyond your control. How would life be different if you had the capacity to adjust to difficult things? Because every marriage, no matter how good it is, eventually bumps into bad things. Write it down. You can count on it. Every marriage, no matter how loving, eventually hits a jolt that they didn't expect, right? Whether it's in our case, it was with a little baby that, boy, took our world inside out, right?
Yeah,
It's
and we're
that
not
capacity.
talking about living with some kind of a Pollyanna, happy-go-lucky denial about some serious jolts that you might have as a couple. But what we are talking about is the importance of that resilience in your spirit. That really is what holds your marriage.
Yeah, and this can happen right into a relationship, into a marriage, because we've heard plenty of honeymoon stories where we've actually got email from folks going, you got to hear what happened on our
about that habit. And by the way, we got the phrase, the habit of happiness, actually out of a textbook. It's one of the very first ever marriage and family textbooks. And what's funny about people like us who study, we're professors, we teach marriage and family, we have a collection of textbooks, right?
Yeah, which sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
But there's this really the first marriage and family textbook, and it was written by this professor at Stanford University. They actually have a building named after him, which is pretty unusual. Usually it's after a donor, but this professor, boy, did he make a difference in people's lives. And in this particular textbook, it's maybe 600 pages long, there's only one single sentence that is in italics. Now, what does it mean when an author writes something in italics? Wake up, right? This is important. Pay attention. I got to make sure you get this message. And this is the only sentence he has in italics. It says, the most important quality of a marriageable person is the habit of happiness. And then he began to unpack that. That's where
Right.
we got the phrase.
Yeah, out of
this
some deep
ability.
research he'd done, not just an opinion, not just armchair psychology, but really what research shows is that that capacity, that resilience of spirit is one of the most important gifts you can give.
Adaptability and that capacity to engender optimism when things aren't going
Exactly.
so well.
When it comes to marriage, attitude is everything.
Every moment is like we have the opportunity to have it and make it as fun as we want it.
So sometimes after a bad day, we'll be in the car, we'll be on our way to somewhere, and he will just in that moment go, you gotta choose to enjoy tonight. It actually works. I hate when he says it because it's so annoying. It's just been crazy how that little attitude adjustment can really make a big difference.
As a couple, you never know how soon this can become important. And we had the cutest example of early on this being a really important lesson for a couple. We had the sweetest girl who was in our marriage prep class. And she came back from her honeymoon and looked us up instantly and said, I need to share a story and tell you how that idea of the habit of happiness saved the day for us as a couple. And I said, what in the world happened to you? And so here was this cutest, bright-eyed new bride, and she said that her husband had planned a surprise destination for their honeymoon. They got married in Seattle. He took her to his favorite spot on the face of the earth, which was a surprise honeymoon to Mount Rainier. So he loved to mountain.
In a tent.
Right, in a tent. He loved to climb. He loved everything about it. Perhaps didn't think through all of the implications for a honeymoon, and she did not know to prepare for that. But it was his bliss, and he took her there. So she said, here I am leaving the church. You know, I'm picturing that we're headed off maybe to some tropical destination or who knows what. Instead, it becomes clear to me we're headed to Mount Rainier. And she says, it's getting rainier, it's getting colder, it's getting rougher. And we get up to this campsite, and she said, it's pouring, and he sets me up inside a tent, and she said it's so wet, there's condensation even inside the tent, just that damp, freezing cold, and he's trying to get a fire started, and she said, I could feel myself just deflating, everything in me. I'm disappointed, I'm stunned, it's nothing I ever pictured, not what I dreamed of, and I started to sort of fall apart and unravel, and she said it just washed over me this sense of awareness. Okay, this is my first jolt. And how I respond in this moment is going to become a part of our forever story. So she said, I didn't want to be inauthentic and pretend I loved camping and that I was thrilled with Mount Rainier. But she said, I decided to enter in. And so he came in, to the tent, sat down beside me, and she said, this is everything you love. Invite me in, tell me what you love about it. And she said he started talking and sharing all the things he dreamed it would be that didn't quite come true. And she caught that spirit, and she said, I just went with it. And in his own gentleness, he kind of came to understand this wasn't ideal. And she said, the next day we packed up, went down the mountain, found another honeymoon destination, had a fabulous time. And she said, all we've done since is laugh about it. He felt supported by me. It's nothing but a great story for us. And she said, everything in me wanted to react. And instead, when I was able to be resilient and roll with that jolt, instead, he has never felt more loved and safe. And now it's just the funniest thing ever. And it actually bonded us. So she said, I felt so protected. You never know when your jolt is going to be or how serious it'll be. Could be your wedding, it could be your honeymoon, it could be, 10 years down the road, but that resilience of spirit saves the day.
So if you're using the workbooks in this area, you're going to find some really practical tools to dig into your own relationship and figure out for the two of you, how do we cultivate the habit of happiness? I remember another one. Scott and Debbie had just gotten married. Do you remember this couple?
Oh, I love it. Yes.
And they didn't go the camping route. They went to a fine hotel.
Yeah, they were at the Four Seasons having a great,
They were having a great honeymoon. And she woke up the first morning of their married life together to some sound. She thought, somebody's in the room talking on the phone. What is that? And she kind of, looks around and there's a light at the end of the bed. She realized that the television's on and it's super early in the morning. And she sees Scott sitting at the end of the bed, just his head kind of sticking up, and he's on the telephone and he's watching television. She's thinking, what is this? I thought we would have, a romantic breakfast in bed and all that kind of stuff. And he's watching the Home Shopping Network. And she's thinking, what is this? And she starts to listen to him talk, and suddenly it dawns on her, he's ordering this expensive set of collector baseball cards from the Home Shopping Network on the first morning of their married life together. And she was just ready to blow a gasket. She thought,
well,
what
here
in the
she
world?
said, I never grew up, my parents were divorced, I never had a dad, so I had all this fantasy that now I had this like stability, somebody who just wanted to provide for me and plan for me, and instead I married this kid who's ordering baseball cards, basically, and she laughed and said, I had to enter it.
Right, and so you get the point, right? When you begin to get a grip on this capacity to adjust to things beyond your control, and Debbie did, boy, she's a
absolutely.
master at it today, and so is Scott. But when you get a lock on this, it will save you so much pain and difficulty in your relationship, that a capacity to be nimble and to adjust to things beyond your control. It's all about your attitude, of course. And by the way, this is something that will happen when it's so contagious.
That's what I love about it. Emotions are very contagious. You know that, right? Like, you have the power not only to make a choice yourself, but the decision you make with your emotions also impacts your spouse. I mean, we know from research that a friend of a friend of a friend is actually impacted by your emotions. That's how contagious they are. They really radiate out.
Now, this capacity to do this, to have that attitude, the right attitude in spite of atmospheric conditions, it's a challenge. I got to tell you, it's not like you decide right now, I'm going to have that. You got to work on this. This is a mind muscle that has to be exercised. And the reason for that is there are certain toxins that will continually combat it in your relationship. Resentment is one of those. You can resent something that took place in your relationship, whether it's you or something outside of your relationship. Blame. You can blame the in-laws. You can blame the parents. You can blame the company. You can blame the church. You can blame whatever.
What do you mean blamed?
You blamed me.
I blame Layla because she blames me.
Our car got broken into, and Ryan blamed me.
I tend to blame Rami when every time I go to write the check for insurance payments.
Yeah, so that was his first response.
It's higher because Rami gets into too many accidents.
Because there was all sorts of trash all over our car.
Is this true?
Yeah.
Because you have more
I feel so
accidents
bad
than
about
me.
it. No, I have one.
Self-pity, that was the one we tended to focus on, right? We threw some great self-pity parties early on in our married
we've done
life.
it.
And it is contagious.
Yes.
I remember we had this little studio apartment, and we were going to graduate school, and it was student housing, really miniature. Our bed literally wouldn't even fit in our bedroom. We had it in our living room. It was just a tiny little place. And so we're just trying to get by. And I remember, we were in love. It didn't matter, but it was our first place. I remember we had this hand-me-down little love seat, and it had kind of stuffing coming out of one arm, and we had a yellow flowered chair, remember that? That was missing the back part of it. We had a bookshelf that was made out of cinder blocks and plywood, It didn't matter, though. We're just young and getting married and just having, loving each other. It didn't matter until this other couple moved down maybe 2 doors from us, I think it was. And in fact, they got a great unit. It was the corner unit. It was the one that I wanted to get when we were trying to get into this apartment complex. It had a beautiful view. It looked over the 7-Eleven. It was fantastic. But when they moved in, I remember this moving truck coming up from like Macy's or someplace, a department store, and their furniture was in wrapping, brand new furniture. When
That was a rare sight.
Didn't see that. And we let them get settled, and we kind of came down and welcomed them to the neighborhood and introduced ourselves and looked around at their place like, wow, this is living. This is pretty cool, And I remember I came back and looked at our apartment, and I said, wow, we kind of need, when are we going to get some good stuff? You ever felt that way? When are we going to get some good stuff? I remember a few weeks after that, I was at the university, and I've been trying really hard to work with this particular professor I respected, and I wanted to to get an internship with him or a teaching assistantship with him. And so I've been jockeying for that position. And finally it was posted, who got the position, on his bulletin board outside his office. Guess who got the position? It was the guy that moved into that cool apartment, right? And I remember I came home and I told Les, I said, I didn't get the position. Why not? You've been working hard with him to make that happen. Well, so-and-so got it. I can't believe that. When's some good stuff gonna happen to us, you know? Little pity party. And then, this is what topped it off. I remember we went downstairs into our garage, underground parking in the city, and Leslie and I, at the time, we were driving an old Ford pickup truck. Remember that? And it had a bench seat, and it was kind of the stuff was ripping apart, had an AM/FM radio, that was as fancy as it got, no air conditioning, and guess who was parked next to us? That couple that had all the cool stuff, right? And guess what kind of car they had? I forget the make, but it was red, and it was shiny, and it was new with leather seats and all the fancy stuff and the power of this and that. And I remember he was showing it to me, and I was trying to enjoy it with him. And that's wonderful for you guys, you know? And I went upstairs and again threw a pity party. When are we gonna get some cool stuff, right? You ever felt like that? Well, what happens when I bring that into my marriage? It's contagious. And Leslie joins in on the pity party with me, right? And that's what happens with resentment. It happens with blame. And it can really bring a couple down. And this is what you're up against when you're trying to cultivate the habit of happiness. When you're trying, and you can sit here right now and decide, we're gonna do that, we're gonna have that kind of relationship, but let me tell you, those toxins will tend to seep into the crevices and corners of your relationship when you aren't even aware.
They're really saboteurs, you know, and the opposite of blame is ownership, just taking ownership. Let's share a way out. And the opposite of self-pity is that sort of resilience. And so it's really making a different choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you do this, when you really offer yourselves, I said, I wish I could give you the wedding gift of the capacity to adjust to things beyond your control. It's a gift that you can only give to yourself and to your spouse, to your relationship. And when you do, your whole world is different. Now, you're gonna find that when you're using the Symbis assessment, and I hope that you are, it really personalizes this capacity to adjust to those things beyond your control. It's gonna give you an actual read, an actual measurement for each one of you. Where do we stand when it comes to this capacity? Which might sound a little threatening because it's like looking into the mirror to see how do we look together on this thing.
But it's truly a gift because it's the resilience you need to go the distance.